Okay, welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 9:01. Stephanie, would you please take attendance?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman,
Present.
Ellen McKitterick,
Present.
David Salazar Austin,
Present.
Mike Soltis,
Present.
and Holly Williams.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I would like to welcome the members of the public for joining us today and thank them for joining us today. First item on the agenda is to ask the committee for a review of the September 2nd, 2025 minutes and have a motion to approve. Are there any comments or discussion on the minutes? No?
So moved.
A motion to approve, please.
I think
Also
Ava,
moved.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you, Ava. A
second.
second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the discussion on the proposed revisions to the private plan audit guide. Michael, would you please lead that discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. And good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Can folks see the PowerPoint presentation?
we can now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So hopefully everyone on the committee received the two versions of the private plan audit guide with the recommended changes. One is a red line version. One is just a clean version with all the changes accepted. Just for background, the private plan audit guide, aptly enough, is the guide we use when we do private plan audits to discuss what the process is going to be and the items we're going to check. Before I talk about the individual changes within the guide, I did want to get a brief snapshot of where we are on private plan audits. So we've got the four audit types: application audit, which is focused on the vote and did the employer follow the right process when submitting the application; contribution audit, which is focused on the deductions from employees' paychecks towards the private plan, both ensuring that it's the correct amount deducted as well as that the funds are used only for private plan related expenses; claims audits, which is reviewing the claims process for these private plans, as well as a sample of claim files; and then financial solvency audits, which are focused mostly on self-insured plans, just ensuring that they have thought about and have a reasonable amount of money set aside to cover the expenses of the private plan. So as you can see, private plan numbers are growing. In 2023, we did 6 private plan audits. I have the 6 in brackets because there's one that we launched, but actually over the course of the audit, we realized they didn't actually keep their private plan. They wanted to come back to the public program. So we still launched the audit, but we never actually concluded it. So I'll say it's still 6. And then in 2025, you can see I've got 18 in brackets. 2 of the audits we haven't yet launched, but they're on the schedule. So we'll get to them in the next month and change. So it's growing. I'd like to do between 20 and 25 every year. I'd like to get that as a target. That'll get us between 2 and 3% of the total private plans in any given year. I think we probably would have hit that target, but we were short-staffed a little bit when our Associate General Counsel left in late summer. So hopefully next year, I think we're going to be able to get to the 20. Based on those audits we've done, we've learned some lessons, and that's really what drove most of the recommended changes we have to the audit guide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some lessons we learned. The first one relates to how we use the guide. Originally, when we drafted that guide, it was almost a workbook and almost would talk you through the entire audit process. And so when we had a kickoff meeting with the employer, we shared the actual audit guide on screen and talked about the various sections. However, we decided that wasn't really the most effective way of communicating with employers. So instead, we created more formalized PowerPoint decks, one for each one of the audit types to talk them through the process. So the audit guide became supplemental rather than the main document we were sharing on the screen. Similarly, we moved away from using the guide as a workbook to work through the course of the audit. So there were a lot of blank sections in there where we would fill them out as you've completed the audit. All of those we've now moved to the end because they're more of a reference now rather than the main document we're using for the audits. We did add a couple of meetings to the audit guide because we figured out a way to communicate with employers over the course of the audit. So we have the kickoff meeting, which has always been there. For claim-specific audits, we have a separate meeting now where we talk with the claims administrator, who is typically the insurance company, and we ask them about their process. And they walk us through their claim process. It helps before we ask for the claim files so we can better understand what we need to ask for and also what we're going to be reviewing when we get those claim files. And then lastly, with the additional meeting, we have a draft report meeting where after we issue the draft report, we actually meet with the employer and talk to them about what we found and make sure we address any questions. We still give them 2 weeks after that meeting to provide formal comment, but having an opportunity for a face-to-face conversation, or at least a remote face-to-face conversation, is helpful. So we added that to the guide. We did add some clarity to language because sometimes when we ask for documents or when we send a survey out on the application audits, we don't always get the answers we're expecting. So we realize our language needs to be tweaked a little bit to be more specific about what we need them to either provide or what questions we need them to answer. And then finally, we did add a few additional items to review. Some examples are requiring an annual notice, approved annual notice that's already required by statute, as well as proof that policy documents were provided to employees. And we also consolidated some of the checklist items. An example I am using is the claim calculation. We used to have 3 or 4 different checklist items that were all getting at the same thing. What was the claim calculated as? So we consolidated some of those. So that's basically the big picture item. When we talk about the actual recommended changes, I've categorized into 3 different categories, kind of from least substantive to most substantive. So the least substantive is the style. So consistency in font, size, and color, some wordsmithing. I mentioned earlier, we moved some of the audit-specific items to the appendix. We also added checkboxes for each of the contacts to see what meetings they were at, as well as who's supposed to receive questionnaires or document requests, because that's obviously a good record to have. One thing we noticed in the checklist is the old checklist had little checkboxes, but they were actually X's, not checks. And the X's, it's not always clear what that means, whether that's good or bad. So we said, why don't we make it easier, yes or no, rather than an X to say whether something was a requirement was met or not. We provided some updates to the timelines and deadlines for the process. And then we updated references to make sure that safe leave covered not just family violence, but also victims of sexual assault. Moving to the slightly more substantive, but still a little bit technical and the process changes. I mentioned earlier the separate slide deck when we had the kickoff meeting. One of the other changes we made is the old audit guide said that any errors we found had to fit into one of these 3 categories: systemic issues, lack of sufficient safeguards, deviations from process, where systemic issues is sort of the most severe, whereas deviations was you have the right process, but someone went outside of that process. What we found out while doing these audits is not everything fits into one of those categories easily. And I'll give an example. On application audits, they do that once every 3 years for most private plans. It's hard to tell whether they make a mistake, whether that's a systemic issue or a one-off issue. So while we still will use this sometimes, we're not requiring any errors to fit within those categories because it isn't always easy to do so. We also removed the note section from the guide. We also made a couple changes to checklists for applications related to documentation. We found out sometimes employers are cooperating with us, so we want to give them credit for cooperating and giving the documents they have, but they just don't have the documents anymore because they didn't retain them. The reason we put in this application audit is it's most likely to occur about the results of their employee vote, because sometimes they have paper ballots and they say, oh, we didn't keep a copy of those. Obviously, that's a requirement they have. Record retention policies in our policy says they have to do that, but they're trying to cooperate. So we don't want to ding them for failing to cooperate when in reality they just don't have the document anymore. So we have those now as separate items. We still will ding them for it, but we want to give them credit where they deserve it. We did streamline the draft report and final report process. Originally, we had 2 separate sections, but in reality, the draft report and final report are essentially the same, just obviously one's a finalized version of it, so we streamlined that a little bit. And then we allowed irrelevant sections to be removed from the audit guide. The old rule said that even the parts that didn't apply to them would remain in the guide. Find it much easier just to take them out. So that's all the sort of less substantive. These are the more substantive changes that we're recommending to the audit guide. The first one is for all audit types, we are now requiring proof of the policy or plan documents and that they were provided to employees and that the annual notice is available to employees. This is important because sometimes the employees are going to be the best, the first line of defense for us, where if they see something went wrong, they compare it to the documents they received, they can file a complaint, let us know that something's going wrong with their private plan. So we want to make sure they always have a copy of the accurate documents. Second change we had was we confirmed documentation was provided prior to the vote that it was accurate and not misleading. So it's not just that you provided it, but did the information on the document, was it correct? So for example, if you gave us a plain language guide and you said, go with the private plan because the public program denies 90% of claims and takes 6 months to approve, that's obviously false. that's a good way to get people to vote for a private plan, but it's inaccurate. So we want to make sure that their documents don't have, misstatements like that. Another edit we made was editing the wording of the employee survey just to help, and it's what I mentioned earlier, get better responses when we send out a survey to employees. We removed a review of approved claims from the contribution audit. Originally, we thought, well, they're using that money to approve claims, so we should review and make sure the money is being spent appropriately. We're still going to do that, but that's just part of the claims audit, and we took it out of the contribution audit because it's not something we don't want to ask for claim files as part of a contribution audit. We added one of the documents to the financial solvency audit, allowing basically publicly available shareholder reports as acceptable documentation of their financial status. And then finally, we require correct contacts in their employer accounts because that is a requirement of private plans. So we thought we'd check that on the audits, that do they actually have the right people listed as their contacts. There's a few other minor edits, and you can see it in the red line changes, but those were basically the majority of the changes we're recommending. Next week, we hope to take the changes to the full board to post for public notice and comment. But before we do that, happy to answer any questions that the committee might have about these changes. And I will stop.
Okay, any questions for Michael? I don't see any. Michael, I have just a few questions
Sure.
relating to the audits. Are these in person or over Zoom?
They're all over Zoom. I mean, if we needed to, we could potentially meet in person, assuming it's local. But yeah, we designed it in a way to be able to do it remotely.
And can you just generalize, what are you finding? Are you finding compliance? Are you finding mostly compliance? How would you characterize the outcomes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can put together more detail with specific sort of data, but I would say it's mostly compliant. The errors we're finding, I guess it depends on the audit type. With application audits, one of the trends I think we're seeing is that I think employers are misunderstanding what we mean when we say the vote needs to be anonymous. They think, oh, well, only the head of HR can see it. Nobody else can see the results. And it's like, well, we want even the head of HR to not to see the results, at least as it applies to individual employees. It's not anonymous to have the person who decides whether someone's hired or fired seeing the results of a plan that the employer wants to do. So that's like one of the trends we're seeing. We don't sense that it's because they're trying to track that. I think it's employees don't feel like they're being coerced by it, but it is a requirement that it be anonymous. On the contribution side, I think we're seeing a little bit lax control over the funds, that they're not tracking the money they're taking out of employees' paychecks. They typically take that money, pay some portion of it to their insurance carrier, and then we need them to make sure they're tracking that additional funds, that surplus they have now, and not using it for anything else. So we've not seen them misusing the funds, but they also haven't been as adept at tracking it and making sure they know exactly how much they have that's associated with private plans. On the claim side, mostly good. There's some things that we are seeing trends that I think we need to see improvement on. Denial letters, in particular, we need to make sure that those denial letters have the claimant's right to file an appeal with the Department of Labor, as well as file a reconsideration request. There's some calculation issues on the claims, mostly around either rounding up or using more recent earnings, which often is better for the claimant, but it's not what their plan documents say, so it's technically a violation. So we haven't seen any sort of malfeasance or intentional, misuse of funds or anything like that. But there's a little bit of sloppiness that we are working to help them clean up.
Okay. One last question. Have you ever heard of employees rejecting a private plan in a vote?
Yes, although typically when that happens, they never submit an application. So the process would be that we don't hear about it. Typically when we hear about it, it's because it's either their current private plan's expiring. We reach out to them and say, do you want to renew or do you want to come back to the public program? And they tell us, we wanted to renew, but our employees voted against it. The other time we sometimes hear about it is when there's like parent and subsidiary companies. We make each entity with its own FEIN file a separate application and have a separate vote. Sometimes they tell us our parent company approved it, but this small subsidiary of 3 employees didn't. So that vote failed and they can only be covered for their parent company, not the subsidiary. So in the normal world, we wouldn't hear about it at all because they just wouldn't submit it. But occasionally the news just come to us about a failed vote.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions for Michael? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to a review of the bylaws and plan of operations. Aaron, would you please lead that discussion?
Thank you so much. So I don't have a slide deck because we don't have any recommended changes.
Hmm.
The last time we reviewed the bylaws and plan of operations was in the fall of 2022. We made some edits at that point. The plan of operations mostly around the timing for adopting budgets, because when we first set out the process, we added an extra week that didn't exist in reality. So we had to adjust it that way. And we just cleaned up certain references. So we're talking about the paid leave authority instead of PFMLIA. So our requirement is that we have to review these documents every 3 years. We don't have to change them every 3 years. We just have to look at them. And we have, and we think that they're still working. We did in this committee look at the bylaws to look at the officers and assess whether we needed 3 officers, and decided this summer we did. So, we're okay keeping everything status quo, but wanted to bring that to this committee and make sure that you didn't have any concerns or any questions about the language. And I'm happy to pull up either one if anyone has specific questions about either document.
Ava,
Aaron, do we have to make updates on the bylaws in regards to our timeline for our committee meetings, or that has nothing to do with the bylaws, our frequency?
Thankfully, past us was smart enough to give ourselves discretion. So we did not put anything in the bylaws that specified even specifically what committees we had to have or the timeframes. We just said how committees would be created. So we don't have to adjust the bylaws for ministerial things like that.
Go past us, and thank
I
you
know.
for knowing that answer. Thank you.
yeah. All right, anyone else? I read the bylaws and I just had one observation, and I'm not suggesting we need to address this, but there's a section about adding staff, and it says, the executive director shall select and hire, and then there was some phrase about the compensation approved by the board. And I said to myself, I don't think we really do that. I know some of it is fixed by collective bargaining agreements, so that's automatic. But that was my only observation of when I asked myself, are we following these to the letter or not?
That's a great point. And it's something that I also sort of paused and went, are we doing this in accordance? The bylaws also say that we have to adopt policies and procedures, which we did in the handbook. And the handbook does talk about the compensation rates. So, and then the budget documents always
Right.
include a PS line, a personal services line. So, and I think we are, just want to pull up the bylaws language itself. I can do that real quick. I think we do achieve that. But wait a minute, is this the bylaws? Yeah, okay. Just looking for the language specifically.
I think it's in 3.6 on bottom page 2. Sorry, yeah. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, because I'm not seeing that what you're seeing, and that would be super helpful.
I assume it's this section.
You can see
Yes.
your screen.
Yeah, so that's thank you, Michael. That's what I was thinking about, the approved by the board in accordance with board approved policies, procedures, and law. So that's kind of my thought is, with the policies that set forth how compensation is set. We are achieving that, as well as the state personnel act. But open to either adjustment, either of our process in terms of when we hire people coming back.
Mhm.
It's not the most efficient process to have to come to the board before I make a hiring offer, but or adjusting the language.
No, I'm not suggesting we change it. I just, that was the only thing that got my attention, but I think you're right. We absolutely don't want to have meetings or votes every time we need to hire somebody. At least that's my view. Anyone else want to weigh in? Okay, so I guess that means we have no suggested changes to the bylaws or plan of operations.
Terrific.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, that's a good segue to a staffing update. Aaron.
Let me share. This.
You can see your
Hide that so you can
screen.
see it a little better. So at, I think the last board meeting, lost track of all time, we had a question which was sort of what percentage of our staff are covered by collective bargaining, and sort of where are they located in the agency? And so we wanted to share that with you. So this is our existing org chart. We do have 2 vacancies, the Associate General Counsel and the Development and Operations Engineer. But these are the positions that we currently have, and indicating by color coding which ones are covered by collective bargaining and which ones aren't. Our enabling statute says that people who are in positions that are equivalent to positions in the classified service that are covered by collective bargaining shall be deemed to be part of those collective bargaining units. And so you see our IT folks on the right. We have folks in purple whose positions are equivalent to an IT analyst 1, 2, or 3, or a IT subject matter expert, which is another bargain for position. The manager positions are equivalent to IT managers in classified state service. We also have a durational project manager, which is an unclassified position in traditional state service, and so it's not covered by bargaining unit there, so she's not in the unit right now. On the finance side, we have folks who are in, so I should say, a lot of these show our functional titles, which may or may not be equivalent to the positions that you would see in state service. Not so much on the IT side, they're mostly functional titles. On the finance side, we almost always use just the regular title that's in state service. So you can see the accounts examiners, the fiscal administrative officer, the fiscal analyst, and the contributions and compliance manager are all in positions that are equivalent to positions in the A&R union, which is P5. Virginia, who's our grants and contract specialist in outreach, she's manages our CECs and is responsible for that program, is also a P5 person. And then everybody else is not covered. So not all managers. We do have folks who are in positions that are equivalent to positions that you would see in state service. In the HR world, our benefits and business support specialists really do work that's very equivalent to the work that workers' comp folks do in state government. And so their title is in the HR series and therefore not covered. Similarly, in outreach and engagement, most of the outreach titles in state service are unclassified, so they're not covered by collective bargaining. So, and then Stephanie is our clerical assistant. She's in NP3. Whereas Amber as an EA is unclassified and would have been unclassified even in regular state government. So that's us, kind of from the union versus non-union perspective. I've talked about the vacancies. I do want to highlight that even though it's a little bit masked just because we have to fit everybody on a screen. We have really a very flat organization, right? There's me at the CEO level. I've got technically 7 direct reports. And most of the folks who are my senior staff have one level kind of below them on the hierarchy. You do see kind of a second level for IT and finance, but we're a very flat organization. One of the directives from the board that you gave to me last year was to develop succession planning. And so that is something that I have been working on this year in terms of sort of my own direct succession, but also in terms of the sort of life cycle of the agency and looking for opportunities to create areas of growth for our staff. We achieved that in some ways with when Lori retired as IT director. Matt, who was the IT solution architect, was promoted. We backfilled his position with the person who was the development and operations engineer, which is why that's now vacant. We've also done a couple of promotions internally and then backfilled those. So the quality assurance IT manager had previously been the engineer, so we've been able to backfill, which I think is important for us to show that there is opportunities for growth and mobility internally. I think that's a way to make sure that we keep our good people, and I think it's part of just making sure the span of control is appropriate. I am very cognizant of our ongoing budget discussions, and I want to make sure that we make prudent and controlled growth opportunities, but I also want to make sure we do have those growth opportunities. So I am looking to create a couple more layers, sort of particularly in finance, in benefits, where we can just have a little bit more opportunities for growth for folks, so they don't have to look elsewhere. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all and see if anyone has any questions.
Questions for Aaron? So I have a question. So I guess my question is, are we adding people solely to have more options for a succession plan? Or are we adding people because we really need them for the work?
Great question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify. I don't want to add people just for the sake of adding people. What I want to do is recognize that due to the demands of the work and due to some of the either greater complexity of the work, where we could create like a team lead role for folks, it would really be a promotional opportunity as opposed to adding headcount. I do want to refill the 2 vacancies. I do think we need another position that is more focused on the registration and employer outreach and sort of the technical sides there. But otherwise, it's really more about creating sort of interim levels that could be filled with internal promotions as opposed to adding headcount.
All right, thank you. All right, anything else on that topic? Seeing no hands up, thank you, Aaron. We'll move on. Any old business? Okay, any new business? Well, let me raise an item of new business, and Ava actually mentioned this before. Last year about this time, we decided that this committee will meet every other month during 2025, kind of on a experimental basis, and see if that's adequate or not. So I think we should revisit the issue now for 2026. So the question is, should we continue our every other month meeting or revert to a monthly meeting? Any, before I ask for input, let me ask Aaron and Michael, has our committees going to every other month for 2025 at all impeded the operation, impeded anything you needed to do for the agency? Time-wise?
Yeah, I'll let Michael answer.
No. The short answer is no, but a little bit longer. I was a little bit nervous that we would have policies that need to be updated. For example, when the we took on the new school employees on October 1st. It's the timing of that, being able to get in front of the committee, get in front of the board, have the 30-day notice of comment from the public, and get in front of the board. I was a little bit nervous about that, but it's worked out so far. I have not had a month where I was like, drats, I wish the committee was meeting so I can get this policy in front of them. In fact, I've just adjusted my timelines to say, well, I know we're not going to have a meeting until November, so I'll make sure the audit guide recommendations are ready, 2 weeks before that. So no issues with me. If anything, if I made any changes, it's been perfectly acceptable from my perspective.
Okay, thanks. All right, any committee members have any thoughts?
Well, I know that I had originally suggested sticking with monthly, but I think that bi-monthly seems to, or is it bi-monthly?
Okay.
Is that right? Bi-monthly is has worked out fine, and especially with assurance from Michael that it's not causing them problems. I think I'm good with sticking with the current schedule. Okay,
thanks. And I think others were in favor of the every other month last year. So do we have a consensus to continue in 2026 every other month? It sounds like we do. Okay, so we'll do that. Thank you. Okay, last item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. May I have a motion?
So moved. Holly.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. It is 9:33 a.m. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day and make sure and vote.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.